Today I want to talk about Augustine's grappling with and then overcoming skepticism. In short, a bit about his theory of knowledge. We're not going to discuss this in great detail. It pops up only briefly in the Confessions. But on the other hand, it's the major topic of a number of his other works, especially Contra Academicos, against the academics, that is to say, against the skeptics. To understand even the title of that work, we have to go back a little bit in time. Plato had developed, well, a theory of forms. We've talked about that in other videos. And he established a school called the Academy. The Academy was his training ground, essentially, where other people who were interested in philosophy, mathematics, music, and other disciplines came to study. And there, during Plato's reign, it was something devoted to the development of Socratic method, eventually to the theory of forms, to this idea that if we use a term like courage or virtue in a variety of cases, there must be something those cases have in common that justifies the use of that term. And if we could understand what that is, we'd have some knowledge of the form. So the Academy was devoted to that method of inquiry. After Plato's death, however, the Academy was led by a number of other thinkers, and very quickly it devolved into skepticism. It remained a stronghold of skeptical philosophers for the next several centuries. Why? Essentially for the problem we talked about. They didn't see any way to have knowledge of the forms. The forms didn't seem capable of exerting any causal power. It was hard to explain how we have any connection to the forms. Aristotle seemed to have an alternative view where essentially we learn about forms as present in objects in the world, and then we use inductive methodologies to generalize on that basis, and so we learn from experience. We form concepts on the basis of experience. But Plato had a different view. We can't recognize things as circular or triangular unless we already have the concept of circle or triangle somewhere in the mind, unless we already have some contact with the form. But it was hard to explain how that was possible. So in short, the Academy became a stronghold of skepticism. Well, what is skepticism in the ancient world? Today, people often think of skepticism, and especially academic skepticism, the skepticism developing out of the Academy, as the thesis that we know nothing. Knowledge is impossible. And indeed, that's the way it's often presented. But as Miles Bernier has argued, I think that's too narrow a conception. That's not actually the way that Cicero or other representatives of academic skepticism defend the view. They have something in mind that's much more radical. It's not just that we don't have knowledge. After all, we could say, well, maybe I don't know, but on the other hand, I have pretty good reason to believe. They attack even that conception. It's not just that I don't know anything, I don't even have reason to believe anything. There is no way to distinguish reasonable from unreasonable beliefs. There is no way to say I have more reason to believe this than to disbelieve it. In short, we must practice suspension of judgment with respect to all of our potential beliefs. Every question is one where we have no reason to believe it's this way as opposed to that way. And so the skepticism they have in mind is an extremely powerful skepticism. Not just knocking down knowledge or certainty or something like that, but the very reason we might have to believe anything. Well, Augustine does become, at a certain stage, a skeptic. He has been devoted first to Christianity, and then because of the problem of evil, he falls away from that. He embraces the doctrine of the Manichees, but then he finds that unsatisfying for a wide variety of reasons. Increasingly, he finds himself drawn towards skepticism. He finds himself saying, in essence, that there is no way to know the most fundamental questions. What is the universe here for? Who created it? What's it all about? Anyway, does it have any goal? Does it have any purpose? Does life have meaning? Is there a God? He begins to doubt whether it's possible to know anything about these questions. And so he ends up concluding not just that those things can't be known, but a more global doubt. He thinks, I don't think anything can be known. So here is how he ends Book 5 of the Confessions. I energetically applied my critical faculty to see if there were decisive arguments by which I could somehow prove the Manichees wrong. If I had been able to conceive of spiritual substance, at once all their imagined inventions would have collapsed, and my mind would have rejected them. But I could not. However, in regard to the physical world and all the natural order accessible to the bodily senses, consideration and comparison more and more convinced me that numerous philosophers held opinions much more probable than theirs. Accordingly, after the manner of the academics is popularly understood, I doubted everything. And in the fluctuating state of total suspense of judgment, I decided I must leave the Manichees, thinking at that period of my skepticism that I should not remain a member of a sect to which I was now preferring certain philosophers. Well, notice what happens here. He says, some opinions seem more probable than the Manichees, so I doubted everything. Now, actually, that's not quite suspension of judgment, though he claims he suspended judgment on all questions. He really did think some things were more probable than others. So in that sense, he thought, at least there's more reason to believe this thing than some opposing view. Is that incompatible with the characterization I gave of academic skepticism? Well, we could say, look, it's one thing to compare things by more and less probable. Another thing to think there is actually a reason to accept any of them. We might think that, yes, there can be degrees of probability, but none of them get over the threshold that would justify belief. So I think technically he's not contradicting himself here. He's not suggesting that he has a different understanding of academic skepticism. I think he's saying, look, I think it is possible to say some things are a bit more probable than others, but none attain a degree of probability that would justify us in actually committing to that and believing that thing. So we can never get to the stage of thinking a belief is reasonable, full stop, even though it might be that some beliefs are more reasonable or more unreasonable than others. Now, when he talks about academic skepticism, I think we need to think some about the arguments the academic skeptics used. The best summary of academic skepticism that we have, I think, is in Cicero. And Cicero gives us a series of arguments, recounting them, but I think they fall into 5 basic categories. Now, other skeptics, Sextus Empiricus, for example, Philo of Alexandria at one stage of his thinking, and a variety of others give us additional arguments. But these 5 seem to me to form the core of academic skepticism. The first one, and the one on which Cicero places the most emphasis, is an argument from apprehensibility, or really, in a sense, inapprehensibility. Now, what does that mean? Here's his claim. There is no mark that divides veridical states of mind from illusory states of mind. What do I mean by that? Well, a belief we can think of as true or false. True or false about the world, true or false about language, true or false about whatever its subject matter is. But perception and other states can also be judged in something analogous to that. My perception that there is right now a camera in front of me can't be said to be true or false, it's just a perception. But it can match or fail to match the world. It might be that it's an illusion of some kind, a hallucination. Or it could be that I'm accurately perceiving the world. So we need a term philosophically that encompasses truth when it comes to beliefs, and also that kind of accuracy when it comes to perceptions and other states of mind. So let's just call that, with the philosophical tradition, veridicality. Then the question is, can I tell which of my own perceptions and beliefs are veridical, that is to say, accurate, matching the world, and which ones are illusory, fail to match the world? The claim is, no. For a belief or a state of mind in general, like a perception, to have such a mark would be for it to be apprehensible. I can apprehend whether this is a veridical state of mind. But Cicero's argument, and the argument of the academic skeptics, is there is no such mark. No state of mind is apprehensible in that sense. None of them reveal on their sleeve, as it were, whether they're veridical or illusory states of mind. Here's one way we might put it. For every veridical state of mind, there is a phenomenologically indistinguishable illusory state of mind. So, yes, here I am accurately perceiving a camera in front of me, let's say, but it could be that there would be an illusory state or a hallucinatory state that was really indiscernible. From my point of view, internally, there would be nothing in the content of the experience, in the phenomenology of it, the experience itself, that would indicate to me whether it's veridical or illusory. And so the claim is that's true for every perception, for every belief, for every state of mind. There is no mark of veridicality, inapprehensibility. The second argument is variability. This is shared with the Pyrrhonian skeptics, such as Sextus Empiricus, and it's a kind of argument that you find all throughout ancient skeptical authors, and for that matter, contemporary skeptical authors. You might describe it as an argument from disagreement. The idea is this: people perceive things differently. Sometimes the claim is different species perceive things differently. Different individuals perceive things differently at different times, and so on. I don't want to go into the details. The whole idea is that things are perceived differently by different people, different species, different places, different times, different circumstances, in different moods, etc., etc. There is variation in our perceptions. But now the second is a premise of undecidability. There is no neutral way to tell which one is right. We have a whole variety of competitors for a veridical account of the world, or a veridical perception of the world, a veridical belief, and there is no way to decide between them. Different people are going to perceive things differently, are going to have different beliefs. There's no way to sort that out and determine from any neutral point of view who's right and who's wrong. So the conclusion is, there is no reason to believe that any of them are actually veridical. We have no reason for preferring it to its various competitors. Why? Because there is no neutral ground to stand on by which to evaluate them. The third argument of the academic skeptics is an argument from comparison. Here the idea is that how we perceive things is a function not only of the way the world is, but of our own perceptual and cognitive faculties. So the way I see things is in part dependent on the way the world is, but it's also dependent on my sense organs. It's dependent on my brain's processing of the sensory information it receives. And different animals, different people, yes, as the argument from variability stresses, do that in different ways. But the point here is simply that the world is only one component contributing to the way I perceive the world. There are many other components. And that's true for belief too. The way the world is in some way relevant to my beliefs, but so are my prejudices, so is my culture, so is my upbringing. There are lots and lots of different contributors to the beliefs that I have. And how do we distinguish the part that is contributed by the world from the part that is contributed by my perceptual faculties, my sensory faculties, my conceptual apparatus, my culture, my upbringing, my society, my historical epoch, and so on? There's no way to tell. So I can't isolate the contribution of the world. I can't tell in what respects my perceptions are veridical and in what respects my states of mind deviate and really turn out to be illusory, contributing something that's not there in the world at all. The fourth argument is an argument from infinite regress. We've already encountered this general form of argument when we were talking about Aquinas' 5 ways. The thought is that if we have some relation on things, here a relation, for example, of justification on our beliefs, then that relation has to have certain characteristics. And if we have not only knowledge, but even if we have any reason to believe something, if something would count as a reasonable belief, then there must be something that justifies it, something that provides a reason for it. And so we could think, well, okay, there must be such a thing, but then it too, if it's to count as a reasonable belief, must be supported by something else, and so on and so forth. It looks like we get led into an infinite regress. But we might say, wait a minute, that can't be. Justifications can't be infinite, and they can't be circular. And so it looks as if we're faced with a puzzle. Eventually, we must come back to something that is actually not justified at all, that we have no reason for accepting. So the thought is simply this: just as we saw in discussing Aquinas, that we can prove that if we've got a relation with certain properties on some set, there must be something outside the set that acts as a first mover or a first cause or an ultimate reason or something like that. So that's the case here. There must be something that is outside the realm of justified beliefs, reasonable beliefs, on which they ultimately rest. There is something like a first belief, an axiom. But those axioms are things that we don't have any justification for. We don't have any reason to believe. And so in the end, if there is such a thing as reasonable belief, it all rests on things that are not reasonably believed, and that seems absurd. The last argument is an argument from rationality. Here the idea is simply that logic is unreliable. We'd like to think that logic alone gives us reason to believe certain things, that the world, for example, is finite or infinite, or that 2 + 2 is 4, or that it can't be both raining and not raining in the same place at the same time. But the academic skeptics say, well, that makes sense, except that reason is capable of leading us into antinomies, into contradictions. So consider the liar paradox. This sentence is false. We've talked about that. It looks as if we now encounter a problem. If it's true, it's false. If it's false, it's true. And so we get led into a contradiction. It's true if and only if it's false. Some people have concluded, well, it's neither true nor false, but we can strengthen it into what is called the strong liar. This sentence is not true. If it's true, it's not true. Contradiction. So I guess it's not true. But wait, if it's not true, it says it's not true, so it's true. And in short, we get led into paradoxes by reason. So reason itself is unreliable. It's untrustworthy. And how do we know when we're engaging in a bit of reasoning or a bit of, reasonable belief formation that's actually legitimate when we're not? We know sometimes that leads us astray, so there is no reason for us to think that right now we're engaging in reasoning that we ought to trust. Well, those are the 5 core arguments of the academic skeptics. How does Augustine end up responding? He doesn't really go into that in the Confessions, though eventually it emerges that we need a combination of faith and reason to actually gain knowledge. The skeptical attitude is one that does have some justification behind it. In the end, to overcome it, we're going to need more than simply reason. But in another work, Against the Skeptics, he goes into some reasons for doubting this. What are some of those reasons? He admits there's no mark by which we can tell that a state of mind is legitimate internally. That is to say, I can't right now, from within, as it were, examine this very perception and tell that it's a veridical representation of the world. But that doesn't mean I can't do anything about it. I, after all, can find out whether other people also see the camera. I can see whether in the end I have actually succeeded in recording something or not. In short, I can see whether it jives with other perceptions of my own and other people's perceptions. I can test its coherence with other perceptions, mine and other people's. That's why, in general, the argument for illusion, he thinks in the end, is not all that compelling. We can tell whether somebody is sane or insane. We can tell whether we're dreaming or not. Now, there's no internal mark at the time, but hey, if we're dreaming, we wake up. There are ways in which we can tell. Right now, can I tell that I'm not dreaming? Well, from within this very perception, no. But I can compare it to other perceptions and very quickly figure it out just by comparing. So, he says, look, in the end, it doesn't matter what people who are asleep or insane think. We have ways of telling, and those ways depend on our matching our perceptions to other perceptions of ours and of other people. So that argument, he says, is not ultimately very convincing. It also doesn't challenge our knowledge of logic and mathematics. Even if everything I think about the world is an illusion, it still seems to be that 2 + 2 is 4, that the world is either finite or infinite, that I'm either standing here or I'm not standing here. These things seem well established regardless of those kinds of considerations. Now you might say, well, but logic itself is unreliable. Well, under a few circumstances like the liar paradox, yes. But do we get led into contradictions when we think about cameras or standing or other things like that? No. So maybe that will rule out some complicated matters. Maybe there are certain things about religion or about metaphysics that we really can't know on that basis, because we can't trust reason to give us accurate information about them. But surely most things aren't like that. He was in a state of mind where he doubted everything. But he ends up concluding, wait a minute, there are a few things I can't doubt. I can't doubt that I exist. I can't doubt that I right now have some kind of belief. I can't doubt that I think. I can't doubt that I am. And I can't doubt my emotional reaction to that. I am, I think, and moreover, I'm happy about that. I love it that I am. I love it that I'm able to think. And so he ends up concluding that those things are things that we really cannot be in a position to doubt. How could I doubt that I am? If I doubt that I am, then I am. How could I doubt that I think? Doubting is thinking. So doubting that is itself thinking. And the same thing is true of our emotions. He says, I know what I'm feeling. If I feel sad, if I feel happy about existing, I know that. And then these things ramify. So in fact, I don't not only know that I am, I know that I know that I am. I know that I know that I know that I am. I know that I think. I know that I know that I think. I know that I think that I am. I know that I think that I know that I am, and so on and so forth. All of those things we can combine into a large tower of knowledge. Now that may not get us very far. That's the problem Descartes faces in the Meditations. But it at least lets us say there is some basis for rejecting the skeptic's claims. Now, does that enable us to know various details about God? As we'll see, He thinks it enables us to know more than we might initially think. He's going to end up in the final books talking a lot about time, about memory, about the nature of God, about eternity, about a variety of other topics that he thinks reason can help us to identify. But will it sort out everything? Will it answer every question in religion, every question about God? Absolutely not. Some of those rely on faith. And so what we get in Augustine is a picture where there are things we can know. There are also things we have to take on faith. In fact, some of the things about God that he thinks we are capable of arguing for and so capable of having reasonable beliefs about, we can also accept through faith. So reason turns out to be important and valuable. It isn't strictly speaking necessary. Faith is something that can do much of the job on its own, but reason can help. And in the final sections of the book, we'll sort out ways in which that's so.